institutions, governments, health systems, economies, but the coronavirus pandemic is most of all testing people. This is not only an unprecedented challenge to our healthcare systems, but also a major shock to our economies. I am convinced that the European Union can withstand this shock. But each member state needs to live up to its full responsibility, and the European Union as a whole needs to be determined, coordinated and united. In a pandemic, scientific-based guidance is essential to help plot the best course of action. Yesterday, together with Commissioner Stella Kyriakides, I launched a board of outstanding scientists, virologists, epidemiologists, to assess the ongoing situation and help us develop the most effective responses. Our goal is to develop guidelines and evidence-based strategies to deal with the spread of the virus. We are just at the beginning. Every member state, even those who have very low numbers today, all of us have to know and to understand this is not possible to stop the virus. But it is possible and of utmost importance to slow down the spread of the virus. That is doable. And you've seen many measures like schools and universities are being closed, events are cancelled. We just slow down the public life. This should give our healthcare systems, our nurses and our doctors, the intensive care units, the time and the space they need to cope with a surge of new patients as the virus spreads on. The Commission is also taking all necessary steps to ensure an adequate supply of protective equipment across Europe. Commissioner Breton is in close contact with the producers of such equipment. We assess the stocks. We work on scaling up their capacity rapidly. And here I want to be very clear. The single market has to function. It is not good when member states take unilateral action because it always causes a domino effect, and that prevents the urgently needed equipment from reaching the patients, from reaching hospitals and the medical personnel. And ultimately, it amounts to reintroducing internal borders at a time when solidarity between member states is needed. On this matter, I have been in very close contact with Germany, with France and with other member states, and I'm happy to report that they are willing to adapt their national measures as we requested. In the last few hours, we've seen travel bans and controls being put in place in a number of member states. Of course, we all want to protect our citizens from the spread of the virus. So let's look together at how we can do that and how we can do it most effectively. Certain controls may be justified, but general travel bans are not seen as being the most effective by the World Health Organization. Moreover, they have a strong social and economic impact. They disrupt people's lives and business across the borders. In other words, any measure that is taken must be proportionate. What we can do and what we should do is to carry out health screening measures. These can be taken at external borders or they can be taken at internal borders and as well within the territory of the member states. And this is why we propose to have EU guidelines for health screening at the borders. Commissioner Johansson will present these today to the ministers at the Justice and Home Affairs Council. Just once again in general, for any measure to be effective, they need to be coordinated at EU level. Member states, especially neighbouring ones, need to work very closely together. In this way, and it's the only way, we can make sure that our citizens receive the health care that they need immediately, wherever they are at the moment. This was strongly the health part. I want to turn to the economic sector. We all know that the virus is not only dangerous for our health, but it is also hitting our economies. It is a major shock for the global and for the European economy. And we have to take decisive and bold actions now, and this on all different levels. The shock is temporary, but we must work together to ensure that it is as short and as limited as possible. And it does not create permanent damage to our economies. And therefore, member states should be encouraged and they should feel comfortable to take all the necessary measures to support the most affected sectors, for example, tourism, for example, transport or retail, just to name some. And they should be encouraged and they should feel comfortable to take all the necessary measures they need to support people, for example, through short-time work schemes or other effective measures. For this to happen, that is giving the member states reassurance, we at the European level are providing maximum flexibility. Flexibility on state aid, and Executive Vice President Margrethe Vestager will present this in detail, and flexibility within the Stability and Growth Pact. Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis will tell you more about this in a moment. In this moment, flexible EU state aid rules enable member states to take swift action to support companies and citizens. For example, yesterday the Commission approved within hours the first request coming from Denmark to compensate companies for cancellation of events with a large number of participants. The serious disturbance to the Italian economy created by the coronavirus will lead the Commission to authorize wide ranges of state aid measures to remedy this situation. Alongside these overarching macroeconomic measures, the Commission has also adopted today proposals to provide liquidity into our economy. We're setting up a €37 billion Corona Response Investment Initiative to grant support to the healthcare sector, to the labour market, to support SMEs from all affected sectors. Furthermore, the EU budget will deploy its existing instruments to support small and medium enterprises with liquidity, complementing thus the measures taken at a national level. To give you some examples, the European Invest Fund will guarantee, for example, €8 billion in loans for 100,000 SMEs and small mid-caps, or, as you already know, the Commission's proposal to enable airlines to keep their airport slots, even if they do not operate flights in those slots because of declining traffic. This temporary measure will help both our aviation industry and the environment. It will help decrease emissions by avoiding the so-called ghost flights, when airlines fly almost empty planes simply to keep their slots. The measures announced today deal with the situation of today. This is an important economic package. But we have to acknowledge that the situation is evolving very fast. We stand ready to do more as the situation evolves. We will do whatever is necessary to support the Europeans and the European economy. Les mesures aujourd'hui qui ont été annoncées correspondent à la situation d'aujourd'hui. Ceci est un paquet économique important, mais nous devons reconnaître que la situation évolue très rapidement. Nous sommes prêts à faire plus. Nous ferons tout ce qui est nécessaire pour soutenir les Européens et l'économie européenne. Die heutigen Maßnahmen sind zugeschnitten auf die aktuelle Situation. Das ist ein wichtiges Paket für unsere europäische Wirtschaft. Aber je nachdem, wie sich die Lage verändert, stehen wir bereit, mehr zu tun. Wir werden alles Mögliche unternehmen, die Europäer und die europäische Wirtschaft zu stützen.
Thank you very much. The outbreak of the COVID-19, as you just heard our President say, it affects every one of us. So our goal together is to work together to bring all of Europe's resources to tackle this unprecedented situation. It is both lives and livelihoods that are at stake. Businesses all over Europe, and in particular smaller ones, are struggling with the effects of the actions that governments have had to take to slow down the spread of the virus. So the Commission will work quickly and decisively to help governments use resources to help citizens and businesses. Our goal is here to make sure that businesses have the liquidity they need to keep operating, and to make sure that the support reaches the companies that need it. And support for businesses in one member state mustn't undermine the unity that Europe needs, a unity that will take us through the crisis. We have to be able to rely on the European single market to help our economies weather this outbreak and to bounce back strongly afterwards. Many member states are taking action. We will work closely and quickly with them to provide the support which the economy needs, and in a way that limits harm to the single market. A part of that, we will give advice and we will share templates of the schemes that works well. There are many ways that governments can help without needing state aid approval. They can give all businesses throughout the economy a breathing space to help them cope, providing wage subsidies, suspending corporate tax payments, or the payment of VAT. But we will need to do more. And the European rules on state aid, they enable governments to take effective action. To name just 3 examples on how to compensate for damages and to provide liquidity for companies. First, in some sectors, that be tourism, transport, hotels, restaurants, well, they are hit especially hard. So we are working with governments to put in place schemes that compensate sectors for the damages they have suffered because of the COVID-19 outbreak. Wednesday, we received the first notification of state aid to tackle the effects of the COVID-19 outbreak. The Danish government submitted its plan to compensate companies that had to cancel events with more than 1,000 people. And we signed off with those plans within 24 hours. And we will work just as fast with any other member state that want to introduce schemes that compensate businesses for the damages which the COVID-19 outbreak causes. Of course, governments can also help individuals directly. This doesn't need state aid approval either. For instance, it may be that they want to reimburse people for tickets to cancelled events. The second example is that our state aid rules enable governments to put in place schemes that give small and medium-sized companies the urgent liquidity that they need. Already 9 member states have that sort of scheme in place, and we will work with others who would like to do the same or to increase the budget of existing schemes. My third example has to do with banks, because our economy's ability to weather such an unprecedented situation will also depend on banks and their readiness to lend. And some governments may want to use banks as a channel for support of the economy, including small and medium-sized businesses. We will work with governments on this. Today, more than a decade after the financial crisis, European banks, they are stronger and more resilient. If need be, in the coming weeks and months, we do have the rules in place to enable governments to ensure that banks have adequate liquidity to lend to their customers. The situation we're dealing with is changing fast. There is every possibility, there's a high risk, that the strain on our economy will grow. Governments may need to give state aid at a much larger scale. And our rules allow for wide-ranging support throughout the economy in member states that are facing serious disturbances of their economy. As I already said Tuesday in this press room, this is the case in Italy. And the situation in more and more member states is going in the same direction. So we're keeping a very close watch on the situation in all member states and staying in close contact with governments. And we are ready to respond as we did in 2008 at the time of the financial crisis. At that time, the Commission adopted a temporary framework guiding member states as to how to use state aid to help stabilise the European economy while protecting the single market. And we are now working on a new framework so that we have it ready if it becomes necessary. What matters right now is that we are prepared to move fast. And this is why we have put in place all the procedures that we need to deal with new state aid very fast. And that includes a hotline that is open 7 days a week for public authorities to raise questions, to ask for advice, to ask for a template in order to give aid to cope with the effects of the COVID-19 outbreak. The European Commission will continue to provide the necessary support to governments and to citizens. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tools at our disposal. We will use them fully and without hesitation to step with the situation as it evolves. One of our top priorities today is to make sure that our companies have all the liquidity they need and that jobs and incomes of affected workers are protected. That applies to Italy, the first country that was hit, and of course to all other countries in the EU. The Commission will support countries that use full flexibility in the Stability and Growth Pact at these times of need. This allows our countries to implement the urgent measures needed to contain the outbreak and mitigate its negative social and economic impact. The unusual events clause can accommodate exceptional spending to contain the virus outbreak. This includes healthcare expenditure and relief measures for businesses and workers. Countries can carry out immediate containment measures to provide medical equipment, increase hospital capacity, civil protection measures and information campaigns. Spending can also be directed towards providing support to workers and the self-employed and the companies that are most affected, especially SMEs in sectors such as tourism, transport, especially aviation, retail and catering. The Commission stands ready to activate the general escape clause to accommodate a more general fiscal policy support. This clause would, in cooperation with the Council, suspend the fiscal adjustment recommended by the Council in case of a severe economic downturn in the euro area or EU as a whole. In addition, to help affected businesses, we will deploy €1 billion of EU budget guarantee to provide up to €8 billion in liquidity to at least 100,000 SMEs. Affected companies will also be able to delay the payment on their existing loans. Today, I am calling on the European Investment Bank and the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development to refocus their activities and to take immediate measures to support European businesses. Finally, it is essential that banks continue providing liquidity to the economy. The European Central Bank announced yesterday measures that will support bank lending to companies affected the most by the spread of the virus and provide immediate liquidity to the system. EU banking supervisors have encouraged national authorities to make full use of the available flexibility that can provide significant capital relief to banks to support the economy. Well, yes, these are challenging times, but by taking the right steps at the right time, we will overcome this shock. We are all in this together, and we will act in our common European interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now take some questions. Anne, you ask the floor for the floor. I believe in German.
Eine Frage. Anne Gelinek vom Anne Gelinek, ZDF Brussels. Eine Frage an die Präsidentin in Deutsch, if I may.
A question to the President in German, if I may.
Frau Präsidentin, die Bundesregierung hat gerade angekündigt, dass sie deutschen Unternehmen unbegrenzt Kredite geben wird. Andere Mitgliedstaaten haben auch angekündigt, dass sie mehr Schulden machen werden. Welche Gefahr geht davon für den Stabilitätspakt aus? Und zweite Frage, wie wollen Sie sicherstellen, dass die EU-Mitgliedstaaten nicht gegeneinander arbeiten mit Exportbeschränkungen, Einreisestopps und
member states don't work against each other as it way with import stops and travel bans, etc.
Und mit aller Kraft
well, I think it's very important that we react
genau in diesem Geiste, so wie die Bundesregierung und andere Mitgliedsländer jetzt starke Pakete auch auf den Weg bringen, um den Mittelstand, unsere Wirtschaft, kleine und mittlere Unternehmen zu stützen. Genau in diesem Geiste handelt auch die Europäische Kommission, dass sie alle möglichen Flexibilisierungsinstrumente nutzt, um den Mitgliedstaaten den Rücken zu stärken in dieser entscheidenden Phase. Was die Ausfuhrbegrenzungen angeht für medizinisches Material, was dringend benötigt wird, so ist für uns Folgendes wichtig. Es ist nachvollziehbar und verständlich, dass die Mitgliedstaaten sich einen Überblick verschafft haben, was haben wir auf dem Markt, was ist vorhanden, und sichergestellt haben, dass das nicht mehr weit aus der EU heraus in Drittländer exportiert wird. Aber für uns innerhalb der Europäischen Union ist es wichtig, dass dieses Material, ob es Masken sind oder Beatmungsgeräte sind, ganz gezielt in den Gesundheitssektor gebracht werden, dorthin, wo es am nötigsten ist. Und deshalb haben wir mit den Mitgliedsländern gesprochen, dass sie ihre Ausfuhrbestimmungen so anpassen, dass das Material, was wir innerhalb Europas haben, jetzt dahin kommt, wo es sein muss, bei den Patienten, in den Krankenhäusern, für die Ärztinnen und Ärzte und das Pflegepersonal. Für uns ist außerdem wichtig, dass wir auf der europäischen Ebene mit allen Produzenten im steten Kontakt jetzt sind, um sie zu unterstützen. Wie können sie mehr produzieren? Wo müssen wir mit bürokratischen Hindernissen aufräumen, damit sie schneller auch produzieren können, dass sie Produktionsstraßen auch umstellen können und dass wir insgesamt in der Europäischen Union ein koordiniertes Herangehen haben, dass wir genau wissen, wer braucht welche Hilfe jetzt im Gesundheitssektor, wie können wir das innerhalb der Europäischen Union herstellen.
Jorge Valero with Euractiv. Two questions as well. The first one, President, if you could clarify this 37 billion in liquidity assistance, will it include the 25 billion that you already announced? And also if this it's also like reusing, reprogramming funds that are already there, or is there some new money, so as we call it? And also, you yourself said, and also Vice President Vestager, that you stand ready to activate new plans or to mobilize more funds or more measures. And I would like to know what is your assessment of the economic situation right now, because yesterday we saw the worst session ever in the markets. Many sectors are being affected like never before. Many workers in Brussels elsewhere are working from home. So what else you need to see to activate more programs and more measures?
So for the first question, indeed we stepped up because the situation requires it, as we see it right now. So we stepped up with the amount that is mobilized. It is basically, I would call it sleeping money that member states couldn't use anymore. So it comes from structural fund envelopes, but we enable this sleeping money to be active now, to be directed immediately into new sectors where normally it couldn't go. So it trickles down immediately to the SME, to the healthcare sectors, to the labour market, for example. So we free money that otherwise wouldn't have been used right now at the situation asking for it. There will be a technical briefing afterwards, immediately, to these topics.
On the question on how to assess the situation, as in your question, things are changing very fast. As we looked at things this morning, it is obvious that Italy is in the most severe situation also when it comes to the economy. We have based our decisions on the Article 107(2)(b) for Italy and 107(3)(b), and it's our expectation that more and more countries will come into a situation where measures can be assessed under 107(3)(b). This is not a checklist, this is a horizontal assessment, but as I said, it is likely that more and more countries will come into this category. We will have a temporary framework ready to be used both in countries in Europe, in regions, and of course all over Europe if we will get into this situation within the coming days or weeks.
Yes, thank you. Sam?
Thank you. Sam Fleming from the Financial Times. I had a question for Executive Vice President Dombrovskis. Yesterday, Christine Lagarde said that she was seeing a stimulus, an aggregated stimulus of around 27 billion euros, suggesting this was going to be inadequate compared with the crisis now faced, and that she was concerned about a complacent attitude when it came to fiscal policy. I wondered if you could give us your estimate of, looking at the aggregate responses you're seeing, how large a fiscal stimulus you're expecting across the bloc, and indeed does the Commission have a recommendation when it comes to how large an aggregate stimulus you think will be needed? For example, the package back in 2008 was around, I think, 1.5% of GDP. Do you have a similar recommendation now? Thank you.
In current circumstances, I wouldn't be talking so much about fiscal stimulus, rather about crisis response, because what we need now, we need to use flexibility within EU fiscal rules to allow member states to fully respond to the crisis, to tackle the medical emergency, to have all the necessary medical financing, and to support our companies and people which will be affected by economic consequences of this crisis. And by working together with member states to ensure that this crisis response can be fully financed, it in itself will provide substantial. It will come at substantial fiscal cost. So, in this sense, one can say it in itself will provide substantial fiscal stimulus. So that's our first task. And as we outlined in our communication, we have different policy tools at our disposal, starting from unusual event clause, ending with general escape clause, and we stand ready to use those clauses and measures as the situation evolves, to ensure that member states can effectively respond to the crisis also in from a fiscal point of view.
Yes, Lily.
Thank you very much, Lily from Politico. I have two quick questions for President von der Leyen. First of all, some of the proposals you're making, for example, with the investments require the European Parliament to vote in plenary. Have you been in touch with President Sassoli to see whether it is feasible for them to come back and to hold these votes? And do you have a plan B in case they can't, how your proposals would actually be implemented without a vote? And second, yesterday you sent a message to Commission staffers about how you would be operating from now on during this crisis. Do you have an estimate of how many staffers are considered essential and would still be coming in, and how many are considered non-essential and would be staying home? Thank you.
Yeah. For starting with the second question, so there is a definition. I think that we can give you tentative numbers later on, which I do not have in mind right now. Don't underestimate, staying home means work from home. So, unfortunately, this is a fact that I know, and it might for some be more difficult to work from home because I know by my own experience that if you have children, then you have really to be flexible to manage all that. But I think it's the right thing now to do, to have this separation, Team A, Team B, with the critical staff and all the others to do the work from telework from home. A big thank to our technicians that enable this home teleworking within a very, very short time, so this is very good. I'm in constant contact with President Sassoli, and therefore I know that he will do with the European Parliament everything to make sure that the decision-making process is undisturbed and can keep on going. Because we are all aware we are in the middle of a deep crisis. We need action now. We need decisions now. And I'm very pleased by all the positive responses I get from the members of Parliament by phone calls or by emails, supporting us, backing us with these bold actions. So this is very good. We've all understood it's time now to be united and to move forward.
Yes, okay. Virginie.
Oui, bonjour. Pour revenir sur ces histoires
d'export ban en Allemagne, the export ban in Germany and the requisitioning of medical equipment in France,
ces deux pays-là, en tout
you
cas,
were saying that those two countries were prepared to adjust things. Now, Germany, if I understood correctly, changed their decree somewhat with an exemption clause for the EA countries, EFTA countries, but is that enough? Could you tell us?
Well, indeed, they were both a bit different. So the French setting was better, was more convenient. And the German export ban had the problem that, which it is fine, both countries seized their stocks. This is fine, and had an overview over their stock. This is absolutely okay, without any question. But important is to introduce a possibility that this material goes right now, that we do not sit on our stocks, but the material goes right now into the healthcare sector and the healthcare sector of the European Union. For example, masks too, they have to be targeted, led into the healthcare sectors, the hospitals. This was more difficult in the German proposal. Therefore, we worked with them since the last days, and you're right that you said to the last moment that it was not enough. Today and this morning, we managed to have the final agreement. They will adopt, actually, I think they adopt right now as we are speaking. That was necessary. I think this is good. Now we have clarified the situation. There was a lot of goodwill. The intention was to keep the material here because we need it desperately, but of course share it in the healthcare sector.
Okay, Susanna.
For Vice President Dombrovskis, actually I would like to understand a little bit better what you mean by full flexibility of the Stability and Growth Pact, because you were also mentioning the recommendations for the adjustment. Does it mean that actually the countries should care less about all these rules they are supposed to follow? And does it mean that everything is going to be, all the measures for health care systems and companies are going to be exempt from the structural effort? And what about the headline deficit? What will be your evaluation here? Thank you.
Well, indeed, when assessing the crisis response of member states, well, it's important to understand that currently we are dealing with sudden but hopefully temporary shock to the economy. So member states need to respond. It will require significant amounts of money, but by its nature, by and large, it's going to be a one-off expenditure. And as such, to respond to your question, indeed, it means that it can be excluded from calculations of structural balances of member states. Of course, we will need to see, the exact expenditure, but the general direction is clear. So, indeed, that's something which we're going to use. We have a possibility as European Commission to use so-called margin of discretion when determining fiscal effort by EU member states. It's also reflected in our today's communication. And as a last resort, we also have a general escape clause in a case of severe economic downturn in the euro area or EU as a whole. So, and what we are making clear in today's communication that we are ready to use all this toolkit as situation evolves to allow member states to effectively respond to the crisis.
Tommaso.
Morning, Galavotti, in Kronos, Italy. Just a couple of questions, if I may. The first one is that the head of state of Italy, Sergio Mattarella, said that the European Union should aid Italy and not put obstacles. He was referring to Madame Lagarde press conference of yesterday. I wonder if the European Union is ready to help Italy. And to Vice President Dombrovskis, if I may, are you ready to exclude all the expenses necessary to tackle the coronavirus emergency, not just one-off expenditure, which is by its nature excluded from the calculation of the structural deficit, but also expenses which might prove to be structural? For example, if you need to hire health personnel, you can't fire them after the emergency. Are you ready to exclude also this kind of expenses from the calculation of the deficit? Thank you.
So to your first question, we are absolutely ready to help Italy with whatever is necessary. This is of utmost importance. This country is severely hit by coronavirus, and we all know that they need help right now. So whatever is necessary, we support. Whatever they need, we will answer. And we know that they are also, like many other member states, hit by the crisis that follows coronavirus. So for all of us, it's very clear that the next one can be another member state. We set an example right now to help the Italian people, to help the Italian government and the Italian country as a unity, because this is for us helping the European Union too. We are all in this moment Italians.
Yeah, to answer to the second question, I can reiterate once again that we are ready to take all necessary measures, use all flexibility as foreseen in Stability and Growth Pact to allow member states to effectively respond to the crisis. And this is a general approach, spirit with which we'll be approaching member states' response and specific requests of member states. I cannot now go into details on each specific request of each specific item which may come, but I think our general response is very clear.
The lady here. Noch zwei Fragen?
Good day. Kushita from PAR. I have a state aid question and I have a competition question. Commissioner Vestager, could you perhaps just clarify if these measures, these framework for state aid requests, is this a special instrument or is this a more general tool where you would be dealing with requests on an ad hoc basis? If it is general, I was wondering if there's a question of timing. Is it an open-ended tool or is it for a period of time? And how does it compare to the tool that was used in the banking crisis? And the competition question is this, can you confirm whether as a result of the virus that DG Comp is perhaps looking at certain sectors specifically to detect price gouging or in general any anti-competitive practices? Thank you.
We do a number of different things right now. As said, we have a specific dedicated phone number. It is manned all hours of the day, all days of the week. And here we can do a number of things. We can provide comfort for schemes, for instance, for damages caused if you have to cancel your event, so that you can get compensation for your damages. That you need liquidity if you are small and medium-sized businesses, but also if specific larger businesses are in need of support. That could be an airline, that can be other businesses which are particularly hard hit. Here we can do also individual measures with the same expedite manner. As said, the first decision we took was within 24 hours. And I think it's also important here to see that we use a legal basis that allows us to escape the one-time, last-time principle, which means that also businesses that have had support within the last 10 years can be eligible for support if need be in this special situation. What we are preparing right now and what we will put in effect if necessary is a temporary framework based on the Article 1073B. It was the same thing that was used during the financial crisis. Back then, it was changed several times in order to stay fit for purpose. Actually, it's the legal basis still for the banking communication that we also may have to use in this very specific situation. So we're preparing it as sort of a more generalized access for member states to know all the things that will be available if larger parts of the Union, and not just Italy, where we use these legal bases right now, that you can have sort of a more generalized approach so that you don't have to work specifically from one country to the next country, but can keep the pace and the speed, because this is exactly what is needed right now for businesses, small as well as large, to have the necessary comfort that the member states, where they are, stand ready to help them through the crisis in order to do what also Valdis addressed just now, being able to bounce back once the crisis the health crisis seems to be over, and we can rely on the single market to be one of the essential tools to be able to do that.
Merci, c'est Griselda Pastor de la Radio Española. J'aimerais savoir si, de facto, on est face à une suspension, je ne sais pas si temporaire, du pacte de stabilité. Est-ce qu'on peut conclure que le pacte de stabilité est temporairement en suspens? C'est ce que vous êtes en train de nous dire quand vous dites que les États membres ont la capacité que vous allez leur accorder, la capacité d'investir tout ce qui sera nécessaire pour faire front au coronavirus.
Space, and we never use it to the full extent. And that's what we're doing now. We're taking a deep, deep, deep breath and using all the space we have with the flexibility. So perhaps you want...
Yeah, indeed. So we are not suspending the Stability and Growth Pact. we are using flexibility which is there in a Stability and Growth Pact. But what I wanted to reiterate once again, so in current circumstances we are faced with a sudden shock, primarily coming from the measures member states are taking to contain the health emergency, and hopefully we are dealing with a temporary shock. So we need to finance this crisis response, but what is important is that we at this time need to provide all the necessary liquidity to our companies, especially SMEs. We need to support our people, so to deal with the social impact, to avoid the situation where this temporary shock becomes with a more negative lasting effects on the economy. Because if in this situation companies will start to go out of the business, will start to lose productive capacity of our economy, and this effects of economy may turn out more lasting. So that's why we are emphasizing so much this need to support our companies, need to support our SMEs, not to lose the productive capacity of the economy, and that's why we're using flexibility both within Stability and Growth Pact and both within our state aid rules.
Merci beaucoup. Merci Madame la Présidente, Madame, Monsieur le Vice-président exécutif. Nous passons maintenant au briefing technique on the record sur les différents éléments du paquet qui a été adopté aujourd'hui. Merci.